and welcome to our general volunteer training. Thank you so much for signing up to assist us at Family Promise of Greater Denver. This video is intended to give some background on the issue of homelessness, both nationally and locally. We'll then dive into more details around what we provide at Family Promise. So I want to start first with just some level setting and background information on the issues that contribute to homelessness. First off, we cannot talk about homelessness and housing disparities without talking about racial discrimination, particularly the discrimination against Black or African American folks in housing. This video, which we'll start with, gives a brief overview of the process of redlining and how we still see its harmful impacts today.
Are you looking for a new neighborhood to live in? Then come on down to Redlining Realty, sanctioned by the U.S. government. There's depressed infrastructure, underfunded schools, no white people. They're all in the suburbs. Heck, we'll even throw in free shoes. Now, doesn't that sound nice? Call Redlining Realty today, and we'll get you a house built on the most American foundation of all, racism. Today's baggage, redlining. Before we get into this BS policy called redlining that created housing segregation and pretty much jacked up the American dream for Black folks, let's take it back to the 1930s. America is in the thick of the Great Depression, and y'all, it was bad. Around 1/5 of the country was unemployed, and nearly everyone was dirt poor. Along comes FDR with his New Deal. Dude was trying to revitalize the American economy, which created what we now call the middle class. But not so fast. FDR's New Deal would cement racial inequality in America for generations to come, and birthed two programs that enforced housing segregation: the Public Works Administration and the Homeowners Loan Corporation, known today as the Federal Housing Administration. The PWA created affordable housing, and surprise, surprise, the agency created separate public housing for Black and white folks, greatly segregating cities. Now let's talk about the Federal Housing Administration. The FHA created low-interest mortgages to build homes across the country. This agency actually built the suburbs as we know it. They basically said, hey banks, if someone applies for a mortgage, go ahead, build them a house. Even if they don't pay you back, we'll still guarantee a loan. Unless they're Black. The FHA's manual literally prohibited the occupancy of properties except by the race for which they are intended. But before we go any further, let me call on a friend to break down the legacy of redlining. The world-renowned white peopleologist from the roots, Michael Harriot.
Sir.
He's a nerd IRL. He's earned a master's degree in macroeconomics and even taught race as an economic construct to some college kids. What's good?
Feliz, what's going on? Good to see you in these Unpack That screeds.
How are these racist government policies tie into what we now call redlining?
The term came about because the federal government, Uncle Sam and them, created color-coded maps that told banks where they could give out housing loans. The green sections were a go, whereas the red sections, typically where Black people lived, were deemed too risky. Even well-off Black neighborhoods like Sugar Hill in Harlem, where Black people like Zora Neale Hurston and Duke Ellington lived, were off limits to banks. Aside from financial barriers, there were actual physical barriers to prevent Black people from living in white neighborhoods. In the early 1940s, there was a 6-foot-high wall in Detroit because redlining, and it's still there today. The Fair Housing Act put an end to redlining in 1968, but we know it ain't go down like that. Banks across the country have been caught using redlining maps as recently as 2015. And get this, most redline areas are still low-income Black and brown neighborhoods.
So FDR's New Deal pretty much screwed over generations of Black folks to come? How else has redlining impacted Black folks?
There's plenty, but 3 really stick out: wealth, education, and criminal justice. First, let's talk about wealth. For y'all who don't know, home ownership is the primary driver of wealth. And who has a harder time getting homes?
Black people?
Bingo. Even when home ownership is an option, homes in black neighborhoods are, on average, valued around 25% lower than homes in white neighborhoods. This is the case across the board, even if the homes in neighborhoods are similar.
So off the bat, homes in black neighborhoods are less valuable.
Yep. And the plot thickens. People in redline neighborhoods pay higher insurance premiums, they also pay higher interest rates, and are denied mortgages more often.
Hold up. We get a lot of our school funding through local property taxes. I bet that redlining impacts education too. How does that all work?
Let me ask a genius who can answer that question.
Yes, Michael, I am a genius.
No, not you. I mean Nicole Hanna-Jones. She's the recipient of the MacArthur Genius Grant and knows education like the back of our hand. See, I can hit her up on our special genius hotline. Funny, I don't see your name on the list. Nicole, tell our girl how redlining has impacted education.
We get most of our school funding through local property tax. That meant that black cities cannot produce as much money as white suburbs, which can tax at a very low rate on high property tax. And so you see vast disparities between how suburban schools that serve lots of white kids are funded and urban schools that serve lots of black and Latino kids are funded. And that all goes back to the legacy of redlining.
Wow. Did the Fair Housing Act help at all?
Once redlining and discrimination in lending and housing became illegal in 1968, we didn't rejigger all of the property values that had been directly related to redlining, which put a premium on white communities and put a much lower property value rate on black communities. It's not like we started from scratch and equalized all of these property values. We just continue to watch white communities accumulate more and more wealth and black communities be deprived. And of course, that's going to impact how schools can be funded.
Are there any places where we can really see the effects of redlining on education?
One place where you can really see this play out probably in the most oppressive way would be the city of Detroit, home to the most unequal school funding border in the country. And that's the border between Grosse Pointe, which is very, very wealthy and almost entirely white, which borders right on Detroit. The schools in Detroit are falling apart, and the schools in Grosse Pointe, one of them has marble floors.
Thanks, Nicole. That was a lot.
The cycle doesn't end there. Redlining, education, and criminal justice are all related. Let me take you on a trip to one of my favorite cities. Here is the original 1937 redlining map of Baltimore. Even though blacks and whites use illegal drugs at about the same rates, black people are 3 times more likely to be arrested. And where do you think they go to fight this war on drugs?
I've seen The Wire. They go to the hood.
See the red areas on the map? That's the forbidden neighborhoods, remember? Now let's look at this data of marijuana arrests between January 2013 and October 2014. Here are the heroin arrests and the crack arrests. Drug arrests and poverty are almost exclusively contained in the redlined areas. Isn't that remarkable?
You pronounced racist wrong.
And getting out of jail ain't any easier. In Maryland, 13 of the 15 zip codes with the highest bills are in Baltimore's redlined neighborhoods.
Damn.
Yeah, so basically, redlining created poor neighborhoods, which led to underfunded schools, more poverty, and more black people in prison.
Let me guess. And the cycle continues?
Like a dog chasing its tail.
So, the hood ain't the hood because black people made it the hood. Rather, it was intentionally created by the government to oppress black people through a federal policy that would adversely impact them for generations to come.
Precisely. And there's more, but that's all we had time for in this here video. Almost every quantifiable indicator of white supremacy all lead back to the government-sanctioned policy of redlining.
Michael, you just ruined my whole day. This is the last time I invite you to this show. Bye, Michael.
So you can see how redlining directly impacted and continues to impact housing opportunities for black folks, but it also impacts educational opportunities and criminal justice involvement, 2 issues that are very much interwoven with economic opportunity and homelessness. The major takeaway from this video should be that racism is a contributing factor to homelessness because housing options affect everything. And this is the type of macro level thinking that we want to bring when discussing issues of homelessness. By and large, homelessness is not the fault of any one individual. It is the result of our systems being designed to uplift certain groups and degrade others. With all of that in mind, we can see the legacy of redlining still today when we look at how certain groups are overrepresented in the population of folks who are unhoused. This is 2019 data from the National Alliance to End Homelessness. So you can see that when looking at race, Black individuals, so the navy blue bar, make up about 13% of the US population and 40% of our unhoused population. Native American, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiians are also overrepresented in the population of folks experiencing homelessness as compared to the regular US population. Asians and whites are actually underrepresented in the unhoused population as compared to the general US population. Looking at the bottom two graphs, you can see that the Latinx unhoused population is actually pretty on par with the general population. So if housing and economic opportunities were fair and free of racial discrimination, then all of these charts would be identical and no groups would be over or underrepresented. We also see certain groups of color experiencing homelessness at much higher rates than other groups, particularly our Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander and Native American and Alaska Native groups. There are a number of complex reasons for these high rates of homelessness, including discrimination, loss of cultural identity, loss of land, all of which are extremely traumatic experiences that lead to other issues that occur generation after generation. Hawaii is also very expensive, and Hawaiian natives are continually being priced out of their homes and into substandard housing or homelessness. These groups also have higher rates of incarceration, addiction, mental illness, again, stemming, of course, oftentimes from that intergenerational trauma and loss of land. Again, it's just crucial that we look at these underlying systemic issues of homelessness before ever examining anyone's individual choices. There is so much more at play here than what meets the eye. Taking a look at Denver, I have some statistics here from our annual point in time count. This is a survey that is required for regions to participate in order to share data and hopefully receive funding from our federal government. It takes place on a single night in January, and providers, surveyors, we attempt to go out and count every single person we can see experiencing homelessness, both in shelters, outdoors, and in vehicles. So this year, in 2020, we counted 4,171 people in the city of Denver that we were able to locate. There were 247 families counted, including 820 people. We know that this survey is always an undercount. Again, it's very hard to find people, and it also purposely excludes folks who are couch surfing or living in hotels, which are two living situations that we see a ton with the family population. From this graph here in the middle, you can see that this count goes up year after year. So even though we know this is an undercount, we can still see this population growing, meaning the problem is getting worse. And the racial disparities here in Denver reflect the racial disparities nationally that I pointed out previously, with our Native and Black populations very much overrepresented in our unhoused population here in Denver. Pivoting just a little bit, every year we collect data from our clients at Family Promise here in Denver, asking them what they perceive as the cause of their homelessness or housing instability. And every year the results pretty much look like this, with the number one contributing factor being evictions, followed by unemployment, intimate partner violence, and divorce and family breakup. This next video dives into the issues of eviction in our country's affordable housing crisis.
You just finished watching our CBSN original Priced Out, LA's Hidden Homeless, about the dire lack of affordable housing in the city. But the issue is not unique to Los Angeles. The United States is one of the world's wealthiest countries with one of the worst inequality problems. We wanted to find out why. For that, I sat down with Matthew Desmond. He is a sociology professor at Princeton and author of the book Evicted: Poverty and Profit in the American City. He chronicles what he calls, quote, a vicious cycle that deepens our country's vast inequality. When we think about homelessness, we often don't consider the role that eviction plays and how once you are evicted, it can lead to a cycle of homelessness. Can you explain how that works?
Sure. I mean, eviction causes loss. You lose your home, but often lose your stuff. Your kids lose your school. You lose your community and neighbors. It takes a good amount of time and money to build up a home, and eviction can just erase all that. An eviction comes with this mark, it goes to the court system, and many landlords say no. So that means people, after they're evicted, are pushed into homelessness, and then they're pushed into worse housing and worse neighborhoods after their eviction happens.
It stays on their record then.
It follows you around, that's right.
Mm-hmm. It seems as if, and maybe this is my, perception, and maybe this isn't the truth, but it seems as if we're hearing more and more stories of eviction. Is it easier to get evicted these days than it was in the past?
There used to be a time where eviction was rare and scandalous. It drew crowds. People protested eviction. And we've gone from that place in America to a place where if you're a low-income person, you've grown really used to, the rumble of the trucks in the morning and effects lining the curb. Eviction is completely overturning low-income families and schools and communities.
And what historical events or economic events played a role in this? Did the recession of 2007, 2008 make things worse?
The recession absolutely played a role, but for many people facing eviction, they've faced a recession before the housing crisis, after the housing crisis. For some, it's been a lifetime of recession-like conditions. What we're in is the middle of an enormous housing crisis, one of the worst our country has ever seen. Rents and utility costs have gone up, incomes for Americans have been flat, and the federal government hasn't bridged the gap. And so we've reached a point where the majority of poor renting families are now spending most of their income on housing costs.
And yet all the economic indicators right now tell us that the economy is booming, that
right.
There's low unemployment,
right.
The economy is growing, jobs for everyone.
Right.
So what's going on? Where's the disconnect?
Right, there's the economy, then there's the economy. There's the economy in terms of the S&P and stock market and Wall Street, and then there's the economy for regular Americans and wages. And if you're living in a home headed by someone with a high school education or less, your income has been very flat over the last 20 years. In some areas of the country, it's fallen in real terms. And as that has happened, rents and utilities have gone up. Here's one statistic. Between 1995 and today, median rent, adjusting for inflation, has increased over 70% in America. So imagine, there's this closing gap between what many families are bringing in and what they have to pay for just basic shelter today.
And you focused on Milwaukee in your book. Does eviction, the process of eviction, vary from city to city?
It does. So I wrote a book about Milwaukee, but then I've formed a research team at Princeton called the Eviction Lab, and we've tried to build the nation's first ever national database of eviction. The federal government doesn't collect this data, so we thought, let's try. And so we've published that data, and we can map, and we can answer that question for the very first time. And what we're learning is that Milwaukee's not even in the top 50 highest evicting cities. Who's up there? Richmond, Virginia's there, 1 in 9 renter homes evicted every year. Tulsa, Oklahoma. Albuquerque, New Mexico, 1 in 21 renter homes evicted every year. Who's talking about Tulsa and Albuquerque when it comes to the housing crisis? We absolutely should be.
And what's to account for the variation? Do some cities simply have tougher laws on the books, making it harder for landlords to evict tenants?
We're still trying to get to that question, but it does seem the law matters. Little things, how much it costs to evict someone, how long you have to wait to file an eviction, that seems to matter very much. But one thing that's striking to me is that in some hot, very expensive markets that we talk about a lot in the media, sure, there is a housing crisis in LA and San Francisco and New York City, but there's also a housing crisis in rural America, in low-cost cities in the South and in the Midwest. This is a nationwide problem.
Let's talk about some of the misperceptions about people who become homeless, who are evicted. I mean, often there is this idea that, well, these people didn't work hard enough, they didn't manage their money properly, they weren't responsible, so it's their fault that they no longer have a home. Is that a misperception?
You know, I think that when I hear something like that, I think of the people that I've met in my reporting and research, you know, and I'm thinking of a woman I've met named Vanessa Sullivan. She was a home health aide trying to raise 3 kids as a single mom. She was living in Trenton, New Jersey, and she was part of the working homeless, this new phrase that we have now about people that are working full-time or close to full-time and still can't afford a roof over their head. So we might say from a position of security or privilege, I've worked really hard to get where I am. But Vanessa's worked really hard to get where she is too. So I don't think that's the full story.
So let me expand the conversation past housing just for a moment, since you study inequality, and that's a big issue going into the 2020 election, and a lot of Democrats have ideas about this, including higher taxes on the wealthy to fund some of these programs that you're talking about. Is that something that you think would make sense?
So in the housing world, we have a social policy that's pretty upside down. And so the money that we spend on homeowner tax subsidies, especially the mortgage interest deduction, that far, far outpaces direct housing assistance to the needy.
A phenomenon here in New York that I'm sure takes place in cities all around the country is that a lower income neighborhood suddenly becomes trendy, wealthier people move in, the people who lived there originally can no longer afford the rent. So is gentrification part of the problem?
It is part of the problem. It's not where most evictions happen, though. You know, most evictions nationwide are happening in non-gentrifying, poor, segregated neighborhoods. Well, even there, people can't afford the roof over their head. So why, right? Why is that? And so when I lived in Milwaukee, for example, I was living in one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city. I was only paying $50 less than people living in the middle-class neighborhoods of the city. And so you get a lot less house, you get a lot more crime and poverty in your neighborhood, but you don't pay that much less.
How does that work? The market factors there are confusing to me because there's got to be some supply and demand when it comes to housing, correct?
So there are some cities like New York and Seattle where there's a supply crunch, but there are a lot of cities where they do have a lot of supply. But people living in the poor neighborhoods are kind of stuck there. They're excluded from homeownership on account of their credit or their income or their poverty. They're often excluded from living outside of segregated neighborhoods because of racial discrimination. And so they are cordoned off into a certain sector of the city, and that produces kind of the opportunity to exploit.
Is that the short-sightedness that we're talking about? It takes a little bit extra effort to see past your own situation?
I think that's part of it. And the way we talk about poverty in America, we don't take personal responsibility for it. The non-poor people. If we're a little bit conservative, we talk about people's work ethic or family values maybe. And if we're liberal, we talk about the safety net or education. And those two ways of talking about inequality let us all off the hook. It's as if there's this enormous problem in the United States. 1 in 5 kids don't have enough money coming in to afford basic necessities in their house.
So 1 in 5 children in America live in poverty.
Right. Yes. And
that's incredible for the wealthiest country in the world.
That's shameful for the wealthiest country in the world.
So, as we saw in the video, we are experiencing a major affordable housing crisis, right? The main cause of evictions is an inability to pay one's rent, and that is true in Colorado. We are ranked as the number 9 least affordable state in the U.S. by the National Low Income Housing Association's Out of Reach report, which came out earlier this year. This report goes state by state and comes up with what they call a housing wage, meaning the hourly amount that a person needs to earn in order to avoid spending over 30% of their income on rent, which is the standard for housing to be considered affordable. In Colorado, that hourly wage is $26.45. That's how much someone needs to earn to comfortably afford a 2-bedroom unit. This means that Coloradoans need to work more than 2 full-time jobs at minimum wage to afford a 2-bedroom unit without spending more than 30% of their income on their housing. And the housing wage is even higher here in the Denver metro region at $30.12. So let's look quickly at the 2019 client breakdown at Family Promise in the context of everything we just learned. While the majority of our clients in 2019 identified as white, 36% identified as Black or African American, and 10% as biracial. So you can see that even though Denver is over 70% white and less than 30% Black, the racial representation at Family Promise is also skewed. I also included this income chart because on the previous slide, the study showed that a household needs to earn over $55,000 a year in order for their housing to be considered affordable. This income breakdown of our clients shows that only 24 out of over 1,000 clients served in 2019 fell into that income bracket. Now that we've laid the groundwork for this hugely complex issue of homelessness, I want to talk a little bit about our programming at Family Promise of Greater Denver. Family Promise is a national organization. It began in the 1980s in Summit, New Jersey, and there are now over 200 affiliates in 43 states nationwide. This organization was founded because a woman named Karen Olson noticed a growing population of unhoused folks in her community, and she also noticed how churches and other communities of faith are a great space to utilize for shelter because they often sit open 6 out of 7 days of the week. So although we are not actually faith-based, something that all Family Promise affiliates have in common is that we partner with the faith community to provide services for families experiencing homelessness. Our affiliate here in Denver opened its shelter in 1997. Around 2014, we saw that a good handful of families were exiting the shelter program, but unfortunately returning to homelessness months or years later. So we began expanding our programming to provide services for families across a spectrum of housing instability. Our mission, which we updated last year, is to form relationships with families at risk of or experiencing homelessness by providing shelter, meals, and a spectrum of supportive services as they obtain permanent stability. So when we say we provide a spectrum of support, we just mean that we have differing interventions depending on the level of need for each individual family. We now offer 6 programs, including prevention, rapid resolution, community case management, shelter, bridge, and our home program. And in 2019, 83% of families who engaged in our programming obtained or maintained stable housing. Here are some of our eligibility requirements. We work with families, although we try to have as expansive a definition of family as possible. So we ask that the folks we serve have at least one child under 18 in their household and at least 50% custody of that child, although we will work with someone who has less than 50% or even no custody of a child in our case management programs. We will also work with a family who has an adult child who is dependent on their caregiver due to a disability, or we will also work with folks who are pregnant in roughly their 3rd trimester. On specific programs, first up we have prevention, which is rental assistance. This program is extremely crucial because it's actually much cheaper to pay a family's rent or a portion of their rent than it is for them to enter the homelessness system, and it's also much, much better for the family to avoid the trauma of experiencing homelessness. So for us, we will provide a family with one-time rental assistance of up to $750. Oftentimes, people don't even need a full month's worth of rent. They just need a bit of a subsidy to get them through a difficult time. We can use this funding to help them either avoid eviction or to put toward a new lease. So in order to access this program, families call our main line and leave a message for Jerry, who runs the program, on the 1st of the month at 7 a.m. and we accept calls until 8 a.m. We work on a first come, first served basis, and we can usually help about 4 to 6 families a month with this funding. Last year, we served 62 families in this program, and 86% of those families remained housed 2 months after assistance. So that statistics just goes to show, again, that sometimes people just need a bit of a boost to get through a rough patch. And this is really just a blip on their radar. Next up, we have rapid resolution, which used to be called diversion because it is meant to divert families from entering literal homelessness. So this program allows us to talk to families who are calling us asking about shelter because they may be unstably housed. However, by providing just some brief intervention or shallow subsidies, we can actually divert them from coming into the homelessness system, thereby reserving our space in the shelter program for families who have absolutely no other options. So this is a very quick intervention. The goal is for the intervention to last less than a week, and some of the things we provide might be move-in assistance for a family to get quickly into a new place, help with groceries or gas money. Sometimes people are staying with family and friends, and really all it takes for us to help that situation last a little bit longer is to fill their fridge with food or help them with a utility bill or a cell phone bill. Sometimes people move here thinking that they are going to start a new life here or that the jobs are better here in the Denver metro region, and they quickly find out that housing here is extremely expensive and they want to go back to where they moved from. So that's something else that we will help with if we can guarantee they have a safe place to stay besides a shelter when they get back there. Sometimes we might also pay for car repairs if that's going to help someone get back to work and keep their income coming in and help them avoid homelessness. Sometimes we will also do family mediation, again, for those families who are doubled up with family or friends. Our family advocates may do a conference call with all of them to kind of talk through any issues they might be having, how we might be able to help that situation extend as long as possible. So to receive this assistance, families call our main line and we will complete an intake with them. In 2019, we successfully diverted 61 families from homelessness. We also have a community case management program. This is just general resource navigation. A lot of folks give us a call for assistance. They're not really sure where to start, so we might enroll them in this program to help them navigate finding shelter, housing, benefits, employment, childcare, food, transportation, just to name a few. Again, families just call our main line and do an intake for this program. In 2019, we served 70 families with our community case management program. Next up, we have shelter. For our folks who we're unable to provide them with interventions to help them avoid the shelter system, we work with 8 families at a time in this program, providing overnight shelter, 3 daily meals, transportation, and weekly case management. Families in our shelter stay at local faith communities overnight, and they move every 7 days to a new location. So this is the national model that I was talking about that Karen Olson started, utilizing space in congregations. During the day, families do have to leave the congregation, but we have a day site that they can come to relax, play, work on their goals, use computers, phones, etc. And all of our staff members are located at the day site to help out with these families as well. And we provide transportation every day in the morning and the evening to and from the congregation and the day site. At the congregation or the night site, each family has their own space, and so they have privacy for sleeping and they can store their belongings there all throughout the week. We do not have a maximum length of stay for this program because success looks very different for every family, and the amount of time it takes to move out and into longer term housing looks very different for everyone. To receive assistance in this program, again, families call our main line, they do our intake, and then unfortunately we do have to keep a wait list because we only work with 8 families at a time, and some families can be with us for quite some time. Because of the coronavirus, families in this program are not currently in congregations. That would not be safe. We are supporting them in an extended stay hotel. We provide them still with transportation assistance, gift cards so they can cook and shop for their own food. And we are providing weekly Zoom case management and bi-weekly health screenings to make sure everyone stays safe. Last year in 2019, we worked with 48 families in our shelter program, and upon leaving the program, 71% of these families left to stable housing, 71% improved their financial stability, and 80% of the families served when they left shelter were employed or enrolled in an educational program or were receiving disability. Our newest program is called Bridge Housing. In this program, families stay in master leased units or hotel rooms rent-free for up to 90 days. These referrals come from our One Home system, which is our community's coordinated entry system. And the idea behind this program is that families already have a housing opportunity in place, but for whatever reason, that housing is not ready. Maybe it's still being built, maybe they're still gathering documents or going through an approval process for that unit, but the whole goal of this program is to keep families safe and comfortable while they're waiting for that longer term housing opportunity. Finally, we have our home program, which is all of our aftercare programming. So the majority of the home program is long-term case management. This is ongoing support for as long as families would like it after they leave our shelter program. And the focus here is long-term stability. We also have a tenant-based rental assistance program. This is up to 2 years of rental assistance and case management support. So families move into a unit, and in the beginning we may be paying 100% of their rent, but over time they pay more and more of their rent until the subsidy ends and they are paying rent entirely on their own. We also have a mentor program called Compadres. In this program, we pair trained volunteers with families for a mentor relationship. In 2019, we served 54 families in home. 92% of those families were stably housed, and 72% were either employed or receiving disability. Up here with a video that we filmed a couple of years ago, which highlights a family who found success through engaging with our shelter program.
CJ's Cleveland, Mommy's little baby. CJ Cleveland, Daddy's big boy. Well, Family Promise, it's a program that if you don't have a home and you have a family, they help you out. And it's a wonderful program because they send you to churches. They have volunteers who help shelter you and your family, you know, when you're in a time of need.
We have nothing and nobody out here. So I think that in itself, that sense of desperation is the fuel that drives us to work harder, to look into things deeper, you know, or do whatever we got to do to get on our feet. So.
Both Cleveland and Monique are two of the most hardworking people that I've experienced while at Family Promise, and really in my life in general. They will do whatever it takes to get it done. They have never been here simply for a handout, to continue, living at the level of life they're at. Like, they are folks who come up with a goal, they meet that goal, they exceed that goal, and then they're ready for the next thing.
I think Family Promise is perfect for the family who's focused on trying to do better for their family, who wants stability for their family, who wants the best. I think that's perfect for those families. They're not just, giving you a bed or, some food. They're actually training you slowly but surely, and it's a really good way of how they're doing it, and how they're approaching some of the aspects that may hinder you from being successful. They're attacking those issues, by teaching you budgeting, life skills, and how to keep a job, how to get a job, so forth and so on.
And like other successes in our program, the family left our shelter housed. So they're now in their own space. They're in a longer-term transitional shelter program, but they do have their own apartment unit. So they really get to spread out, have their space, work towards their next step goals, towards that sustainability.
We are in our new home. It's a transitional housing. It's a 6-month program, but we have our own home. We get to cook in our own kitchen. Yes. 3 bedrooms, and it's just ours.
Oh, you're driving out.
Thank you guys so much. You guys showed us what it's like to have a family and have someone care. And you guys just don't stop once we're out of the door. You guys keep on with us. I just want to say thank you. We love you. Thank you to all the churches who volunteer, everybody who put in their time to help each and every family out there. Thank you.
Thank you so much again for signing up to volunteer with us. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, Mel Davis Campbell, our Director of Programs. My email is here on the screen, and have a great day.